Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Do you know what that's? Okay, sorry. Let's start that again. Well, hello out there, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bill Harmer. I'm the Executive Director of the Westport Library. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all for what promises to be a really terrific program. Before I introduce the host for tonight's event, I'd like to say what a singular honor it is to have three legends from the world of sports with us this evening. My heartfelt gratitude and thanks go to Dave Winfield, Charles Smith, and Candace Parker for agreeing to take part in this critical conversation that goes beyond the sports arena and playing field and goes right at the heart of American culture. We're delighted to have the opportunity to bring you guys to Westport, albeit virtually, and thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to join us this evening. It's always a pleasure and thrill to welcome my friend back to Westport, Staples High School graduate Jeff Pegues. Jeff is the CBS Chief Justice and Homeland Security correspondent. Since joining CBS News, he has led the network's coverage of some of the biggest stories of the decade, from the Russia investigation to recent active shooter events and terrorist attacks. He is often at the top of the CBS News. His latest book, Compromise: How Russia Undermined American Democracy, investigates how far the Kremlin poked into the voter databases in the 2016 election and why it happened. Jeff has also become one of the most informed voices of the conflict between the African American community and police. Not only has he reported exclusively on police actions and Justice Department investigations, he has also authored a book on the subject, Black and Blue: Inside the Divide Between Police and the Black Community. Jeff has received numerous awards in his more than 2 decades in the business, including 3 Emmy Awards, the Sigma Delta Chi Award from the Society of Professional Journalists, and in 2017 was part of the CBS News team that won the prestigious Edward R. Murrow Award. He's a proud graduate of Miami University, where he was a scholarship football player and starting wide receiver there in the 1990s, and of course, he was a all-star sprinter and football player here at Staples High School. Jeff, welcome back to Westport.
All right, Bill, thank you. Good job. I'm chuckling because we should have omitted the last paragraph of my bio when you put it up against these two guys here on the screen. It just doesn't add up to the same thing. But I appreciate the introduction, Bill. Something else that you said, and I don't know if the people who are listening or watching got this reference, but he mentioned 3 legends. And again, for a minute there, I thought he was talking about me, but he wasn't talking about me. He was also talking about Candace Parker, who is not with us yet, but she will be joining us soon. But we do have these 2 legends here to talk about social justice issues and so many other things going on. And as we come on the air, I'm going to use that term loosely. This is virtual TV, if you will. There's this latest scandal developing in Washington, D.C. about the Department of Justice investigating bribes for pardons. So that's breaking news. We're not going to talk about that. I won't ask you gentlemen about that. But listen, the reality is we're just weeks away from a new administration taking the reins of government in Washington. You know, these days, obviously, President Trump continues to dominate the headlines. President-elect Joe Biden is announcing his cabinet choices, and there is very little talk, frankly, now about social justice. Did you know that last week marked 6 months since George Floyd was killed on the streets of Minneapolis by a police officer? It is, of course, an incident that sparked protest and a movement on social justice issues across the country. But did it spark enough of a movement to actually change things? Now outspoken when it comes to social justice issues, America's star athletes and former superstar athletes are speaking out, putting their reputations on the line like never before. So what has changed in the world of sports? You know, there was a time when most athletes avoided weighing into politics. Well, times have changed. So as you know, and as you've heard by now many times, I grew up in Westport, and I was a fan of the New York Yankees. Dave Winfield was one of the reasons why. The Hall of Famer is hailed as one of the greatest athletes ever to play professional sports. He is one of only 7 players in the history of Major League Baseball to reach over 3,000 hits and over 450 home runs. The 12-time All-Star is among the all-time leaders in hits, home runs, and RBIs. Since leaving the game, he has served in leadership positions with the Major League Baseball Player Association, supported social justice movements, and he has advised entrepreneurs as well. Also joining us, Charles Smith, the 3rd overall pick in the 1988 NBA draft. During his rookie season, he was elected to the NBA All-Rookie First Team. He was traded to the New York Knicks in 1992, and he remained there until 1996. I was, of course, a Knicks fan as well. So he spent the 1996-1997 season with the San Antonio Spurs before retiring in 1997. He is from Bridgeport, Connecticut, nearby. And of course, he starred at Pitt. I remember him those days with, was it Jerome Lane?
Yes, it
you
was.
guys dunking all over everybody in the Big East. And since his retirement, he's been using his platform to help others. And so that's where we will begin tonight. And what I want to do before we go back to Minneapolis, which is where you're from, Dave, let's talk about what's happening now in sports. You have professional football dealing with COVID-19 issues. You had the NBA. I think the consensus was that the bubble was a success. Dave, what do you think about the state of sports right now as it tries to, navigate this new reality that we're all facing?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Glad to be speaking and to your audience from the library, because I've always been an advocate of reading. Reading is one of the pillars of a person's success in life. So I'm glad that we could be a part of this. But when you're talking about sports in particular, man, it's in a period of flux. We're in an area we've never been before. We're all pioneers. We're trying to figure it out. It's not as easy as it wouldn't be easy anyway if people followed guidelines or rules. But you have almost half the people that don't believe in guidelines or rules or even believe the facts that are out there. So it makes things even more complex. That's why we have a pandemic as such around the country. It's so broad and deep. But we just had a board meeting today with the Baseball Players Association, and we're going to try to find out everything. How are we going to get through this 2021 season? Because last year they played a limited amount of games. Next year they expect to play an entire season, but it's not going to be easy. And families are involved, travel is involved, and just your health is involved. So I don't want to try to go too deep into it, but let's just say all sports are in a period of flux and change, and we're all going to be pioneers in this space.
Indeed. Charles, what do you think?
Well, I turned my volume down. Sorry about that. Well, from my perspective, with everything that's happening in sports, I've been very proud of Chris Paul, Michelle Roberts, and the NBA players. They took a very hard stance and position during this playoff run and this short season that they had in Florida. And I was proud of the fact that they were able to really put the conversation on the dinner tables and amongst friends and people who don't normally talk about race relations. Clearly, it was the George Floyd killing that tipped us all off. These are discussions we should have been having years ago, and it took a tragic event like this for it to happen. But what I think is the conversations have started. The hard discussions have started. And where we are today, I believe that it's a time of reflection. It's a time where I think the communities are trying to figure out the best path to work out a solution, a non-violent solution, because the bottom line is, no one wants to see young people, Black people being killed in their communities. And it's on the table. And we're having those discussions. And I think that's where it is. And Jeff, quite frankly, my personal opinion, I think marches are kind of exhausting right now. You hear talks of and conversations about potentially, national boycotts, which might be more prevalent. But I think where we are now, it might not be in the forefront of the media, but there's an undercurrent and the conversations are happening.
And two, I talked about the incoming administration. Obviously, not much has changed in the last 6 months with the Trump administration as it relates to social justice issues. Do you think there will be more progress made and more pressure, frankly, on the new president to really make substantive changes? Dave?
There will be pressure, but it's something that's in the president's bailiwick. You see the way he is appointing people, a diverse cabinet, people who understand more than just white men or people in the society. The people that he's going to appoint, I think, are going to attack many of the substantive issues, the disparities that are in place. It's part of what they've lived and what they've learned and what they've done. So it's going to be completely different than the last 4 years. I'm not going to say anything is easy, because one thing that, when it came to the vote, the election, even though Biden won, it's like it surprised me in a way that there were still 70-something million people, even though the president lost by 6 million plus votes. There were 70-something million people that said, I don't want to see change. I like what you were putting forth. I like your policies. I may not like the way you brought them forth, but I'm with you. And that's kind of a truly scary proposition. It reminded me, quite honestly, of growing up in the 50s and 60s over the past few years.
And you grew up in Minneapolis.
Yes, it wasn't like it.
Minneapolis, St. Paul.
It wasn't like we had George Wallace at the steps of the university or anything like that. But you knew what was going on in America. There were bus boycotts. Emmett Till was lynched. Rosa Parks was on the bus. With the bus boycott. Martin Luther King was shot. Malcolm X. You could go on and on. So there was always turmoil. New Orleans got the first young person to go to an elementary school in 1960. I mean, so you could go on and on where there were disparities, and we were talking offline before we got on here, some of the research that I went back and looked at in the 1950s, early 1950s, when you talk about Levittown, New York, the first suburban community in the country, it was sanctioned by our United States government that, okay, you can build 17,000 homes, but no blacks are allowed to live there. You can't rent, can't resell, can't anything. So those are the systemic kinds of things that were in place going way back. So when we're talking about things that can happen today, I'm all for it. You can start with the march, you can start with the agitation. That's the First Amendment, that's a right. You have to bring everything to light for the public. And that's the only way sometimes you're going to get some action.
Yeah, and I really think that the WNBA deserves some credit for starting part of the movement, at least among athletes is concerned. And we're going to talk more about that as well when Candace Parker joins us. She's an WNBA superstar. She's going to come on and we'll ask her some questions about how all of that started with the WNBA. But Charles, what about the NBA? You had players like LeBron James speaking out. in terms that you typically don't hear star athletes use, especially as it related to a sitting president. Were you surprised to see him take that kind of approach?
Well, I was not surprised to see him to take that approach because we had a president in office that kind of took that approach first. And it was more of a retaliation and to speak back with regards to what he was putting out to the general public through tweets and messages that enticed and gave people a thought process that we didn't have toward in this country and toward this issue. So to hear LeBron speak up, to hear all the players speak up, and just to touch on Candace and the WNBA for a second, to see what they did, as you mentioned, Jeff, at the start of all this, it was commendable. They led the WNBA led the charge, and it was just great to see. But overall, you know, I just really believe that we're in a position where you got one or two ways to look at this, Jeff. Is either you can tolerate an individual in dealing with everything that's going on, or you can accommodate them. And I think where we are now to tolerate what's going on is more of a negative. I think we're in a realm where we need to accommodate various people and embrace what's going on and deal with the issues head on as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we just got a preview of what's to come because I could see Candace there, and she is back. Candace Parker, nice to see you.
Hi, how are you all? I'm so sorry that I'm a little bit tardy, so I apologize.
Don't be sorry. This is good. This is like a surprise built in for the audience now that they see you up here, and you know all about how TV works, even though this is a virtual conversation. And so why don't I introduce you, Candace Parker, everyone. She was a Hall of Famer really the day that she was drafted into the WNBA. She was not only dunking the ball, but breaking other barriers as well. And I think people forget that when it comes to social justice issues, it was the WNBA that was really leading the charge. And sometimes they don't get the credit that they really deserve for that. They will tonight. But there's another reason that Candace caught my attention. I have to be honest. When I was talking about doing this with Bill Harmer, I was watching TNT late one night. And Candace caught my attention because she was working as an analyst while also working her day job in the Orlando bubble, right? With Bradenton with the WNBA. But what really caught my attention was how you were interacting with Shaq on the set. You were really giving him grief. I know you guys are friends and you could see it there, but you are a talented analyst as well. So we really appreciate your time. And what we're going to do is ask you to analyze, some of what has happened in the WNBA with the social justice movement. How did it start there? When did it start there?
I really don't know when it started. And to me, I think that's the most important thing with the WNBA. We realize we are a league that is made up of women. We are the longest standing sports league ever in the United States. And with that being said, we are 80% African American. We come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different religions. LGBTQ. We are the majority in that league of the minority of this country. And so I think we take that so seriously, and we have a platform. We're able to have voices that carry, and to be a part of the WNBA, especially during these last 6 or 7 years. I mean, for me personally with the LA Sparks, I think our first moment was in 2017 when Colin Kaepernick was kneeling for the flag. And that was a moment in 2017. It was our second WNBA finals, and we weren't even thinking about the game before the game. We were playing Minnesota. I remember we were talking about as a team that was made up of a variety of backgrounds. You talk about from overseas, we had people from France, from Martinique, we had, across Europe, and that didn't understand America. And it's past. And so for us personally to ask them to kneel, we decided not to come out for the anthem. And when we came out, Minnesota booed us almost the entire first quarter of the game. And for me, that was a moment where it wasn't about basketball. It was about using your platform to definitely have change. And so that's the biggest thing.
But you said the fans booed you. Were you concerned about the backlash?
Not at all. And I think that's the biggest thing about this moment right now. When you feel support and you feel supported, I don't know if any of the athletes are worried about the backlash like they used to be. In this generation alone, I've watched, you've seen the summit with Muhammad Ali and Bill Russell. You've seen that on pictures. And they were one athlete. There was 3 athletes, 4 athletes. Now you're seeing entire leagues that are standing in solidarity. And so for me, personally, with the WNBA, we've had the NBA that has come to our defense a number of times. The WNBA tried to fine us for certain things, for certain messages we wore across our shirts. We had Carmelo Anthony, LeBron James, Chris Paul come forward. And so I think just being able to have that support across the leagues, I think has allowed athletes to have even bigger voices.
Yeah, and you talk about Muhammad Ali, you talk about Colin Kaepernick, and how they were penalized essentially for taking stands. I know growing up in Westport, Dave, you were a great player and you were also outspoken. You weren't always, saying the politically correct thing in that you would stand up for yourself. But did you take positions on social issues then?
That's a great question. And as I look back at it, I was pretty much the first professional athlete with their own nonprofit foundation, operating foundation, 501c3, going back to the early 70s. Helped Arthur Ashe do it, Martina Navratilova, Harold Reynolds, you see on TV, a lot of people. So we're doing my foundation work. It was always focused on the underserved, the minorities, the people that didn't have a chance. I was trying to open doors in a different way, but it was through the nonprofit sector. It was a great motivating factor for me, because if I was like, hitting 125, nobody's going to listen to you. So I'd be kicking behind on the field. And then, when you get amongst the people, Dave, and then you could get your message across. So I had my foundation for over 20 years, every city I played in. And it always focused on health, sports, health, education. And we ran the whole range, keeping kids away from drugs, working on computers when they first came out. Candace, you have to hear these computers when they first came out. Yeah, absolutely. But so it was more of that kind of focus. And I had an awareness, and I'll just say this, my awareness of being Black and where my people came from historically in West Africa didn't come about until I started learning about it in college, when they protested, took over the administration building at the University of Minnesota, and ultimately they got what they needed. But the same old tricks were in place. Let's get the grand jury to look into these people. They did all of that stuff, but still they got an Afro-American Studies department, which later became, they have women's studies, they have Chicano studies, they have all these studies now. And without the marching, without the protesting, without the agitation, wouldn't have it today. So I was always kind of aware and confident in who I am. And I guess I earned enough money. I said, I'm going to speak up when I can. And if you had to fight, we had to fight, But I was one of those early pioneers out there, and everybody couldn't do it. And then last thing I'll say, baseball, they have they have fewer African-American athletes, but they put together something called the Players Alliance, following in the footsteps of what WNBA and NBA and all the people are doing. So Candace, I have to tell you, I appreciate you guys so much. Women taking the lead, NBA, LeBron, all of them, I'm all for them. Sorry it took so long, but I had to get it out.
That's all right. That's all right. And I think we're getting feedback. I don't know if we have to adjust volume on some of our computers, but Charles, I wanted to ask you, you played during the Jordan era. And he was not as outspoken. One of his famous lines was that, hey, Republicans buy shoes too. But now you have LeBron and so many other big stars, Steph Curry, speaking out. Do you think the money in the game has given players the license to say whatever they feel like saying? Because you know what? They don't really need that job.
Well, I don't want to think that it's the economics that gives the athlete a voice. It's just a matter, I think, if you mention Jordan and the fact that he was not as outspoken as others, and people may criticize him for that. To him, maybe it was he didn't want a business disruption. Would he be where he is today if he was more outspoken earlier? We don't know. Is it a situation where it hits home? A lot of the different athletes might not be from various communities and might not touch home as it would for others. You see some athletes that were not as outspoken along with Jordan, and you got, say Tiger Woods, or you can even throw, O.J. Simpson in there. They weren't that outspoken. And then you got on the other side of the ledger, you might have a Colin Kaepernick, Muhammad Ali, and we can go back as far as Paul Robeson, who were very outspoken. So it's just a matter, when I hear that question or talk about it, Jeff, you almost can't fault anyone for not really identifying or understanding of what the Black community is dealing with unless it touches you, unless it's a part of you. So a lot of people are so separated from what's going on that they don't really understand it. And I think that's a big part of the problem. I love the fact, like Dave said, and you've mentioned earlier, that the athletes today are more outspoken. But I think this generation, Dave and I were talking earlier about our sons, the next generation behind us, with LeBron and some of these players, they've grown up with technology in the palm of their hands. So they have a more global view of everything that's going on. They believe they grew up with India being in their living room, China, Africa. They're sharing memes. They're sharing music worldwide. They're more in tune with one another. So their ideas of speaking up and speaking out about certain subject matter is par for the course for a lot of them. They've been doing it for a long time. My kids educate me and say, Dad, we don't think like that anymore. I hear that a lot. And I have 4 boys. So it's a different generation. And I commend them for the way they respond and deal with things much different than we do.
We're getting some really good questions here. So I want to dig into some of these questions. The first one is from Brian Crandall, who is asking Candace Parker this question. In terms of equity, equality, and justice, not only for our nation, but in sports, what would you like the fellow panelists and interviewer to know about you as a woman athlete and achiever, especially in regards to disparities in athletics and in the home?
Wow, that is an excellent question. First and foremost, honestly, I really just want everybody to understand that when we're fighting for women to be able to compete at a professional level, we're doing so with that in mind of people watching that are seeing women in leadership positions. For young girls and young boys to grow up and see women in positions of power. Because I think we have this stigma in our mind of what a leader looks like. And it doesn't look like me. And it doesn't usually, what first comes to mind is a woman's face. And with that being said, I do believe that then carries over into the boardroom. And it carries over into the workplace because it is run like a team sport. And so women that are deserving of positions aren't getting it and aren't even being looked at or being interviewed because of stigmas, because of stereotypes. And so I think that in all of this, we're seeing women in WNBA. Do I think I should make anywhere near what LeBron makes? Absolutely not. We understand that the world is a business. The business is about money, but it also comes down to investing. And if you don't invest in something, everybody here knows as a business person, if you don't invest in something, you don't know exactly what it can be. And so there's been a number of times, just even as a woman, we don't even know if women can be the face of, Adidas or Nike, because if you don't ever put the product out there and really put your all into it, then you don't know what it could be. And so I think that's the gender equality cry is, to see women in different positions, in positions of power, at home, wherever, but just having opportunity.
Okay, next question from Nell Ann, I think. Nell Ann Lynch. This is to Dave and Charles. As early pioneers in the social justice movement, were you physically or verbally threatened? Did you ever fear for your lives or family in taking a stand? Dave.
Charles, you want to go first, or no, I can't say that I've been, threatened. I mean, playing sports, just from the 60s on, I've been called the N-word and all kinds of crazy things, thrown.
We lost you, Dave, there for a sec.
And racial. I'll turn mine down. Can you still hear me? Well,
yeah, your video froze for a second. You were talking about facing racism, being called the N-word.
Yeah, but not so much with the social and racial equality movement. I was younger when the other movement was taking place in the 60s. I was certainly fully aware of it. And by the time I got to college, and then Martin Luther King was killed and Malcolm X was killed, and a lot of things were shut down. It's we're just in a new era now. And I'll just say this, and even other baseball players today, had something not happened to George Floyd, they wouldn't be stepping out today, right now. They're just too few. They weren't connected. There was no joint cause, and our sport wouldn't even be moving forward, baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a long way to go.
Yeah, I think that was a wake-up call for a lot of people. Many of you know that I covered the Floyd story, and from day one. In fact, I woke up early the morning after his death and looked at my emails and saw that video, and it was shocking. And I said to my leaders at CBS News, we need to go. This shouldn't have happened. We need to be there. And a few hours later, I was on the ground. And I think that was a wake-up call for a lot of people, Charles.
Yeah, I missed the beginning of your question. I think I was the reason why it was echoing. I had two platforms going at one time. Can you repeat the question, Jeff?
Yeah, we were just talking about how the Floyd case was a real wake-up call. Seeing that video, seeing his death unfold in that way is still hard to believe that something like that could happen in this country in this day and age. Do you think it was, well, obviously it was a major wake-up call for athletes across the globe and people across the globe?
Yeah, it was a major wake-up for athletes across the globe, but more importantly, athletes who've come from communities. I felt it. I literally, when I saw that video the morning when I woke up, I literally cried. It was you've seen so many other instances happen up until that point, but the bottom line is it hits home. That's like my friends, my cousins, my relatives. It's no different. I grew up in a community like that. So it really hit home. And as I stated earlier, it was that unfortunately, an incident like that, but that opened up the dialogue for all the hard discussions to take place. And we needed that. I've had so many hard discussions with friends of different ethnic backgrounds and cultures who it taught me the fact that they didn't really understand, because it wasn't not that they didn't want to understand. They just couldn't conceptualize, other than seeing George Floyd die, understanding how tragic it was. It was all of the different things that happen in the community that even lead up to that. They're just not in tune to it. So it was me having the empathy to understand that and to educate them and talk to them about it. And believe me, those discussions were really hard. And I think the country is having those discussions now. Corporate is having those discussions. And from those discussions, corporate America is beginning to put more money into educational programs. All the diversity and inclusion executives in different corporations have now stepped forward to educate people in their offices. So, I like what's going on. I don't think that people have forgotten about it. Like I said, the election and the presidents are dominating the news right now, but I believe the discussions and everything is still moving forward.
It's moving forward, but even in the WNBA, you have Kelly Loeffler, who is running for Senate in the state of Georgia, who is a co-owner of the Atlanta WNBA team, and she got a lot of heat for what she said in the wake of the George Floyd case, that the Black Lives Matter political movement does not align with the league or her team. Well, now it seems, Candace, her team does not align with her.
The WNBA doesn't align with that thought process. People that could not understand that this was a human rights statement. This was nothing about being political. And, we wore Warnock shirts, throughout the bubble, as well as have given our support towards a number of organizations. I was on a Zoom with Stacey Abrams about a week ago about empowering and uplifting the community to get out and continue to vote, not just for presidential elections. This is huge coming up in January. And with that being said, I think the WNBA has taken her comments quite seriously, and we understand how important it is for us to now leave even a bigger imprint. And maybe because of her comments, it allowed us to kind of, be a part of that, of getting more and more people in Georgia to get out and vote. Because honestly, as a league, we've seen what happens, what's happened in the NBA. We've seen in years past with people that have come to surface that maybe don't align value-wise. And have dealt with it in different ways. But at the same time, it's like you're representing a league that is 80% African-American women. And it's no longer okay to not believe in our rights and our freedoms.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Would you play for the Dream if Kelly Loeffler is still the owner? Would you play for that team?
Here is the line that we as WNBA players have had many meetings about. And, something that was said earlier, Dave said it earlier. A lot of these women come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, and there's a number of individual players that can speak out and probably continue to collect their check and go feed their family and be just fine. There are a number that don't have that opportunity and those same choices. Mm-hmm. And so with that being said, I think respect is shown to either, whether you decide to continue to not keep your mouth closed and fight for what's right, and maybe you're using those actions towards wearing a Warnock shirt, supporting voting rights, and trying to eliminate voting suppression. That's in a way action. You're not, a terrible person if you decide to play for that organization or for that franchise, as long as you're doing something to better it. And that's kind of the stance that we've taken. I personally don't know if I could, but at the same time, I don't fault for anybody trying to feed their family.
And Charles, I heard you nodding or saw you nodding in agreement.
Yes, I love what Candace is saying. I think that was an ignorant statement. I think there was in the NBA, we had a general manager that made a statement in a very political, intense situation in Asia, and it had caused some disruption economically with one of the franchises. So people are sometimes make statements because those are people that are not willingly looking at situations from an educational standpoint. I mean, we're all on this Zoom call. Fortunately, I know Dave. I don't know Candace, and I'm meeting you, Jeff. But if I were to just be around you for 15, 20 minutes, and I knew I was going to be around you for 15, 20 minutes, I can tolerate you. You wouldn't know much about me. I wouldn't know much about you. We talk and we leave. And I would be on my best behavior because I'm not going to be around you but for 15 minutes. But if I decided in that 15 minutes to go below the surface to get to know you, and if you are from a different ethnic background, to understand your culture, ask you questions about who you are, where you come from, and get below the surface and create a memorable moment between you and I, you're creating a dialogue and a friendship and a relationship of some sort. When I hear people make statements like that, they're not willing to understand really what's going on. For that statement to come out after all of this, that's unconscionable. That just can't happen anymore. Not now with everything that's going on. That says that person has not really looked into really what's going on.
Yeah, Loeffler's statement was tone deaf,
right,
to say the least. I tell everybody about the first hours that I was in Minneapolis and the crowds of protesters were showing up, and I got on the phone to my producers in New York, and I said, most of the people here are white. And, I think a lot of people were surprised by that. In part, that is the way, and Dave can attest to this, and I haven't lived in Minneapolis in the past. It is a progressive city, or at least it's been known in the past as a very progressive city. And so in the days and weeks after George Floyd, there were a lot of white folks in those crowds protesting with their neighbors who happened to be black folks. And so that leads me to this question from Andrea Harmon. She says, as black professionals, how do you feel about white people, including children, embracing and participating in Black Lives Matter demonstrations? Dave.
I'll go first here. Essentially, historically, people used to talk about civil rights. Hey, can I sit at the counter with you and drink a sarsaparilla or Coca-Cola or whatever the case may be? Now we're talking about human rights. We're talking about citizenship rights. We're talking about the whole gamut of inclusion, being equal, having freedom, equality, and justice for all. I simply said in that video I mentioned before, one of the things I said that for this movement to succeed, and we sure hope it will, it's almost the third time after Reconstruction, after slaves were freed, after the civil rights movement of the 50s or 60s. This is the third time we're trying to make these changes. 401 years in this country. And white people are going to have to be involved. And that's part of the hard conversations I've had with my white friends who have called me and said, Dave, what's going on? Why is this happening? And all of this stuff has been bubbling just below the surface. As I said, it's like 210, 211 degrees, and then George Floyd, boom, 212, it's boiling point. And I just have to mention this, and I'll let someone else comment on it. I had thought about it, and I said there are 5 things that are making the top blow off of this time, and even white people are upset too. It was a combination of not in any particular order, but they all start with the letter P. It was policing, which is been over the top forever. It's been when you prosecute, nobody gets convicted. It was the president, just his actions. It was the policies he was putting forth, and then it was the pandemic. You put all 5 of them together in the mix, boom, top blew off. White people upset, they're tired. They were saying, I can't believe this inhumanity. I'm joining in. And so Black Lives Matter isn't just an organization. It is just the title of the movement coming from all different fronts. And that's, so it, like I said, essentially white people, all people, young and old, different religions, backgrounds, cultures are involved this time. So it has a chance to succeed.
Candace, you want to weigh in here?
I was on a Zoom call. I remember that morning and the next morning after George Floyd's murder. And I remember the term "you" was used a lot. I feel so bad for you. And it was kind of that they were trying to console me. And, you know, when it starts being where you find some similarity in somebody else, and it stops being that I'm so relatable to that person and you're mad as a human being. I think Jon Stewart, I was a huge Daily Show fan. And Jon Stewart, I had the opportunity to be on in the HBO The Shop with LeBron, and Jon Stewart was sitting next to me. It was like a dream come true. And he said, you know, if aliens come and attack the world, I guarantee humans would unite. And that has stuck with me, because when you find similarity, you can find similarities with people. And to me, if you weren't pissed off at a human being able to do that to another
Right.
human, then are you human? Like, you need to look at yourself, and you need to look in the mirror and figure out whether you're just posting the black square just to be like everybody else, or if that really affected you. And so for me, there were a number of people we've had to have, you know, tough conversations, but I'll put it in this sense. As a woman through life, I've had to have my brother say things that I've been saying for years. LeBron say things about women for people to believe it. We need guys as allies. And as African Americans, it's more effective when somebody comes out that it doesn't affect and says that this is wrong. Then I think that's where real change is. And you're right. When, you know, Dave's right. When white people got pissed off and were in the streets and were, you know, protesting and a part of this movement, it became a whole nother beast. And I think that that's what we need to continue. Like, you need to stick up for things that aren't right because they're not right, not because they don't affect you. Like, it's not your equality, my equality, it's our equality. And so I think that's been the biggest thing, is just making sure that people understand, like, we're human.
And so where do you think we go from here with a new administration coming in? If we're focusing just on sports, where do you think the NBA, the WNBA go next season? Do they continue to make social justice statements, or do the names on the back of the shirts go back to whoever's wearing that shirt instead of George Floyd or someone else killed at the hands of police? Charles.
Is that me?
Okay. Yeah. So that's a great question, Jeff. And there are meetings daily to try to figure that out. It's a sensitive issue. In a way, you'd think that maybe the owners did the Black Lives Matter labeling on the courts in the league, because the league is 80%, you know, African American, and it could have caused, you know, business disruption. But they have to come out. You can't put it aside and not do anything going forward. So they're going to have to do something, and they're going to have to do it in a unified way, and they're going to have to be smart and have it be very impactful. The answer to that, I don't know, but it is a question, and I'm sure that they're having meetings about that on a continued basis to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Dave.
I'm going to throw a number of things at you, Candace, then you can pick it up from here, unless you want to go first. Candace.
No, you got it.
Go ahead, Dave.
You know, this is the discussion that we've been having on a lot of different fronts. The people that I know in the business world, the financial field, global financial services people, they're making changes. If you, it's slow and they're late, but they're jumping in when they're doing things like, okay, we're not going to take your company public if you don't diversify your board of directors. That's happening now. You have, I'm going to give them kudos. Citibank, you can go online and go to Citi, then GPS, and you could look at a study that was done, and it enumerates all the things you can do as an individual. You want to make a difference. All the things you can do if you're your corporation to make a difference in all these areas of disparity, and what you can do from a governmental standpoint. So that's another thing. But here is a question that when we were talking to all of our good friends of all different colors and backgrounds and such, I came up with a question, and I asked them, if you could wave your magic wand, and I know no one's ever asked you this before, what would, if you could make one change to make a difference in society, to make things more free, equal, and just, starting with people of color, what would it be? And they have to think about it because they've never thought about it before. They may never have visited they may not have a Black friend. They may have never bought anything from a person of color. It just wasn't part of their life. But if you know this is out there, what would it be? And it ranges. I've had a whole range of people respond. Some people, they were broadband. I'd get broadband so that telemedicine and education could come forward. Others, the vote, and where you live and where you work and control your destiny. So, but just ask one of your friends that question and see where they're coming from and see if it's big enough. If they say, well, I changed my school down, I'll get a new principal, or, that's too small. Think big and then act big.
Candace.
I think commitment. I used to hear this all the time as a kid, that commitment is doing what you say you're going to do, even when the moment you set it in is gone. And for me, I think 2020 has been a moment and a movement of commitment. And with that being said, I think the telling part of commitment is 6 months. I mean, Dave, Charles, you guys have already been there. Day one of training camp. Everybody's in there early. Everybody's working out. Everybody's ready to go the extra mile, run the extra sprint, shoot the extra shot, get in the extra swing, whatever. But then come day 35, then what is everybody doing? And I think that's going to be the biggest test right now, is making sure that we stay true and committed to what we said we were going to do, which was to bring about change and to better the movement and push this forward. And, just being on certain boards at Adidas, I'm on the social justice board, making sure that Adidas is doing what they said they committed to do. And I think everybody being able to hold people accountable, hold individuals accountable. Fortunate enough to be on a social change fund with D Wade, with Carmelo, with Chris Paul, that are getting in the community and continuing to do these things. So I think the biggest thing with the NBA, with the WNBA, with all the leagues across the board is going to be, are we doing what we said we're going to do a year from now? Are we continuing that mission? And I think that's going to be the answer to a lot of our questions.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Even in, my business, I'm, proud to work for Viacom CBS because in the last 6 months, they've not only talked about diversity and making it a priority, but they've gone public within the company, if you will, with measurables. Here's what we want to do. We want to have this percentage of writers working in Hollywood for us. We want to have this and this. You have to lay out those measurables because that way you can be held accountable. You can talk the talk, but you got to walk the walk too. And I think that is a major change that we've seen in the last 6 months with many of these Fortune 500 companies realizing that, okay, the world has changed. Now we have to adapt. And I have always maintained that it's good business. It is good business. The more diverse you can be, the more money you're going to make. I can guarantee you that. Because, as a young African-American growing up in Westport and watching TV, I gravitated toward the Dave Winfields of the world, the Charles Smith, Max Robinson, Brian Gumbel, people who look like me, because you just didn't see it that often. Right. And so diversity brings dollars for business. And anybody who thinks otherwise is sort of, kidding themselves. So we have another 15 minutes or so left. And what I hoped with this panel is that we would get an audience that included young, aspiring athletes. So all three of you have been in that rarefied air where you are the top athlete wherever you go. Olympic teams, all-stars, Hall of Famers. So Dave, let me start with you. I have a question from my nephew, who's an aspiring baseball star, and he's got talent. I'm not just saying that because he's my nephew. But he was wondering how you stayed healthy and kept in shape for that long baseball season. How did you do it?
Well, I would tell him and every other parent, have them play another sport too. Don't, because if you get too focused on, there you go. If you get too focused on one sport, there's going to be either overuse injuries, or you may be put in the wrong sport. You're a big kid when you're 10 years old. Oh, he's going to play third base for the.
Oh no, we lost Dave. All right, we'll come back to Dave. Candace.
Yankees. He goes two.
Oh, we got him back.
Can't even barely make a JV team in college. You got it. I just. Are you still there, everyone?
Yeah, we lost you.
Basically, play another sport. It helps you mentally. You don't get the burnout, and you don't get the overuse injuries. And you may not be put in the wrong. You may be in the wrong sport when you're young. You think you're going to be Charles Smith playing power forward for the Knicks. You should have been a soccer player or something, running around 5'9", running around the field. So just mix it up, but have some fun. If it's your passion, then you have a chance to make it. If you only like it, you play it recreational. If you love it, you can do anything.
And Dave, you played basketball, a heavily recruited basketball player too.
Yeah, football and baseball. I was the only guy drafted all three professional sports: NBA, ABA, NFL, and then in Major League Baseball.
All right, so why did you choose baseball?
Baseball was the number one sport in America, if you can believe it, when I grew up. It was Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle and all that. They didn't care if Bill Russell won 13 championships or whatever. NBA. It's a different world.
All right, Candace, how did you do it? I know that you have a brother. You were very competitive with your brother. Did your dad play basketball too? Did I read that somewhere?
Yes, my dad played Big Ten basketball at Iowa, 72-76. He was the first 4-year scholarship, because before that it was, freshmen couldn't play. So he was the first, class where it played freshman year.
Okay, so it's in your blood. It's in your blood.
It's in my blood, but I am with you have to play other sports. I grew up a soccer player. In 96, I watched the Olympics, and I pictured myself being on the podium for the Olympics as a soccer player. And then I went on and played volleyball. And then I finally settled my junior year in high school. I started to focus on basketball. And my parents killed my dreams. They told me that they'd never seen a 6'4" soccer player. So they might have had something to do with me not playing soccer. But at the same time, a lot of the skills that I got from soccer, I use in basketball. I mean, you talk about footwork, everything you do with the ball, you're doing with your feet as well. So I took that from from soccer. And then volleyball, is the same thing with footwork. And so I think you can take from every sport. You don't have to specialize. I have an 11-year-old daughter right now, and she's playing, she played soccer, she's playing volleyball, she's doing basketball. I'm not going to make her focus. And, I think a lot of parents are kind of narrowing their kids, options and what they can and cannot do. And honestly, it's burnout too. You're doing the same thing for 30 years. You can't tell me you're not going to get burnout. So I'm a big believer in playing, multiple sports.
All right, Charles, let me take another approach to this question. So you grew up in Bridgeport. Recruiting back then, it was a little different than it is now. Now it seems to start when these kids are in middle school. Was it that way for you? I mean, obviously you are an off the charts star in Bridgeport, and people knew about you all over the country. But, what would you say to these future scholarship athletes about getting recruited at a young age, how to keep that in perspective? What would you say to them?
Well, yeah, their kids are being recruited now in 4th, 5th, 6th grade. I think it's quite ridiculous. Dave mentioned it earlier. You might have a kid that's, a big kid at age 10 or 11, and he could be, 5'10", and everybody thinks he's going to be a pro, and he might not grow anymore. And imagine the pressure put on that kid. And you see these rankings where kids are, number 1 in the country in the 5th grade. Well, how can you put that type of pressure on a kid? But I think that recruiting has definitely gotten out of hand. But for a parent and for kids, I don't think they need to be concerned about being recruited. Teams have enough scouts. They spend a lot of money to find the kids wherever they are. If a kid is good, he's going to be recruited. He's going to be seen. She's going to be seen. Just play your sport, be a kid, live your life, and train. But the overusage of one sport, and Dave touched on it also about the overusage of muscles, doing the same sport over and over again. It's an epidemic of, ACL tears. Actually, and Candace, you may know this, girls are playing soccer and basketball. They're getting more ACL tears than boys are right now. So there's something to be said about that, where a kid still needs to be a kid, take some time off, still work at your craft and your game, but the recruiting and stuff, it'll happen. Enjoy life, work your butt off, and become the best athlete you can be, and all the other stuff will take care of itself.
And Jeff, if I can add on just one thing that's been like sitting on my heart is the fact that like creativity, like everything I've seen trainers on Instagram doing crazy stuff with kids, it's all structured. And boy, they could go behind their back 200 times in front of a cone. But guess what? In the game, the cone moves and you have to react and you have to learn how to be creative. Right. And I think a lot of that creativity came from playing pickup and just playing and just being a kid and not everything so structured.
Correct.
So I think that that's also a huge thing for today, is understanding there is a balance of being able to have trainers, but also just going out and just playing basketball or just playing your sport.
And
Good. Go ahead.
Let me just put a cap on that one. It's like I played ball with Tommy John. There used to be nothing called Tommy John surgery, but now they're focusing on velocity. How hard can you throw it? It's not even pitching. Get the dude out. That's what it's all about. But they're working on velocity. And so virtually every kid, by the time they get through high school, and certainly through college, is having Tommy John surgery on their arm. And people think, well, he throws harder now. It's crazy. It's crazy. So that's the people that are promoting, these, what do you call them, the trainers and such. They're trying to build their name and reputation, but they're out of control too.
All right. Let's take 2 minutes, 2 more minutes. Give me 2 more minutes of your time. So, Candace, is there something that you regret about your basketball career to this point?
I was kind of the school that if I could tie up my shoes and I could get out there and play, regardless of the percentage that I was, you got out there and played. I've played on a broken ankle before. I came back and had ACL surgery and played my 5th month. It took 5 months to come back. I played 6 weeks after I had my daughter. So I think my biggest regrets with playing basketball has been, now this school of thought is to take more time. Like, biology has a certain amount of time that you have to physically let it heal, but everybody's body's not healed at that point in time. And so to be 100% when you go on the court, I think would have extended my career even more, and extended outside of my life. Like you think as an athlete, you're focused so much on right now, but you forget, like I have an 11-year-old daughter, and let me tell you, she's not going to be me in basketball. I'm going to quit before that, but I want to be able to play her and play one-on-one against her and, have fun and walk and play beach volleyball. And there's life after basketball. So I think that's my biggest regret, is fighting through a number of injuries and not really waiting for them to heal.
Charles, you feel the same way.
Oh yeah, yeah. I can remember when a former player told me, if you had the uh, desire to really extend your career, take off one season and let your body heal, and you'll probably get another 3 years in. But there's so much pressure that a lot of players will not do that. But it is true, because when you finish playing and you let your body heal, it's almost like you can go back out and play again, because you do play injured for probably, half your career. There's always something going on. And there's a reason why doctors say when you get a scope to stay out for, 4 to 6 weeks. There's a reason why. And we always push it back to come back in 2 or 3 weeks, and we're Superman, Superwoman, and we're back on the court. But you never really healed. And sure, you're playing well, but are you really playing at your maximum output? That's always questionable. So yeah, you definitely need to take care of your body and take the necessary time off and heal, because it doesn't happen a lot in the professional ranks.
Okay, David, same question. What do you regret? Any regrets with your relationship with Steinbrenner?
Well, I'll answer it 2 ways, because that first one, I say, I wonder had he left me alone and supported me, how good I would have been. I never had that. For 10 years, I went to work, and it wasn't pleasant experience.
What was the tension there? What caused that tension? I was reading somewhere that it was about the start of the contract and the start of your relationship. He thought that you were making less than you actually were. Is that what it was?
That might be part of it, but that's his problem. He's a big businessman. I'm just a ball player. I'm negotiating, but no, he's very similar to some people that we see in politics today. His personality is that way. But I'm going to take it from a different standpoint. The positive thing that I did that I would suggest to other people, I looked at my career. It was a game. Yes, it was fun. I was enjoying what I enjoyed, since I was a kid. Then it was a science. Every year, how did I find ways to improve my endurance and skill and grow and improve and expand? And that was the second part, the science. So it was a game, it was a science, and then it was a business. While you're playing that game, you're going to be out one day. How do you make your friends, your relationships, so that you can go to the next thing in life? And I put those things together. And that's how I kind of looked at my career. I knew it was going to be a short period of time, but actually it ended up being 22 years, that I played. But I put all those things into play. I enjoyed what I did as long as I had the God-given ability. It was a science. How do I keep improving, whether it was stretching or plyometrics, or we used all kinds of things to improve my skill. No drugs. And then the last part was the business part. How do you make this career pay off and go do whatever else I'm going to do in life? And that's what I would suggest people look at their career. It worked for me.
Last question, I promise. I'm just trying to get all the questions in. This is the last one. So this is also for Dave. What advice would you give a kid that is a D3, Division III athlete and dreams of being drafted in a smaller major league draft? I'm assuming perhaps they're thinking minor leagues in this question. He's got the skills. He just needs a chance, is what Nell Lynch says.
Yeah, there's no one way for a person to make it. When people continue to improve their skills and their abilities and opportunities, all I can say, when they have opportunity in front of them, go through the door. If it means meeting someone, doing a tryout, go through that door, because you never know what the collateral situation, what other people you're going to meet, what other opportunity you're going to be put in. And, if it's, you can be any size in baseball and succeed. Look at Joe Morgan or Jose Altuve, and then you have Randy Johnson and big old dudes like that, 6'10", 6'11", and they can, and everywhere in between. So don't give up on yourself. You never know when your opportunity is there.
Okay, you guys are all superstars. Thank you so much for time. This has been a lot of fun for me. I hope our audience has enjoyed it as well. I'm going to send it back to Alex. Thank you very much to all of you. Good luck. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Jeff, Charles, Dave, and Candace, just what an honor to have all of you here. Thank you so much for being here and for having this really important conversation. Jeff, our streak of technical glitches continues. We're undefeated, my friend.
But
Guys,
you know what? That's okay. That's okay.
Guys, again, thank you. What an honor to have you all. And for everybody watching tonight, thank you for being with us. Stay safe and be well, everybody. Thank you and good night.